overstatement to say that the Tata Nexon EV has single-handedly galvanized India's EV ecosystem. If you see a green plate attached to a car, odds are it's a Tata Nexon EV. As a car that fell right under the Rs 15 lakh government subsidy price cap, it hit the sweet spot, and with the 250 kilometer real-world range, it was ideal for inner-city commutes. Not only is the Tata Nexon EV India's best-selling EV, the fact that it had an EV alternative made the Nexon the best-selling SUV in the country, replacing even the mighty Hyundai Creta. So the question is, with the new model in place, why is Tata trying to fix something that isn't broken? Enter the Tata Nexon EV Max. On the surface, it doesn't really look very different from the standard Nexon EV. It's got the same architecture, the same dimensions, and apart from this new color scheme, it looks pretty much the same. However, the most significant changes are underneath the surface because the Nexon EV Max gets a larger battery pack. 30% larger to be specific, and that means more power and less range anxiety, offering over 83 kilometers of additional real-world range as compared to the Nexon EV. But before we get into the details, let's get a few things out of the way. Firstly, the Tata Nexon EV Max isn't here to replace the standard Nexon EV. Both will continue to operate in their own domains, with the former built to tackle the inner city commute, while the latter is here to take on the highways. Secondly, with a starting price of Rs 17.74 lakhs, the Tata Nexon EV Max isn't eligible for government subsidies unlike the entry-level Nexon EV. And thirdly, the EV Max's 40.5 kWh battery, along with a few other safety features, adds roughly 100 kilograms to the car's overall weight, even lowering the ride height by 10 mm. How this alters the way this car drives is what we're here to find out. If you thought the changes to the car were limited to the size of the battery pack, you were mistaken. Yes, on the inside, the steering wheel's shape remains the same, as does the overall layout of the dash. Take a closer look and you'll find a few standard changes that really help elevate the interiors. Starting with this jeweled knob which comes standard across all variants. It's straight out of Jaguars and Land Rovers of the past. Then you have wireless charging, ventilated seats. You've even got 3 separate driving modes which, when pressed and engaged, you get this crisp aural feedback from.
City Drive mode activated.
It also tells you how it changes the range of the car. So if you're in sport mode, for example, the range of the car is different, and if you're in eco mode, you'll immediately find an increment in the range. There's also a Multi-Regen brake mode system which allows you to control the level of regenerative braking you want working alongside its standard brakes. The Tata Nexon EV Max did manage to check all the boxes. At no point does it feel deficient in power. In fact, you just tap the throttle and it surges ahead, makes this clean whistling noise, which is always refreshing to hear, and so far I've not really grown too used to it. There are a few things that I'm not that big a fan of. To begin with, this jeweled knob, while it does look nice, I much prefer something that's a bit more tactile, that feels more solid, because when you use it, it kind of feels like a washing machine knob, and you always have to look at what mode you're in because there's no solidity to it as such. Secondly, for a car that costs as much as it does, I mean, it does bring you into fairly competitive territory. I think Tata could do well with putting better plastics, because the one on the bottom half of the dash they just feel a little flimsy, and I think that's the only aspect that otherwise can diminish how this car can make you feel inside. Of course, the range, I've not been able to test it out completely, and that's something we're going to have to do on another day. yeah, it's not going to be a thrilling drive, but the suspension, all of it, which Tata Motors had claimed has been tweaked in accordance with the additional 100 kgs which it gains in weight, doesn't seem to have altered the ride. It's not particularly stiff, it's fairly softly sprung, but not so much that it induces a lot of body roll around the corners. This is still a bottom heavy EV, and as such you get flat cornering, great performance on tap. Yeah, color me impressed. Now, of course, coming to its neatest little party trick, which is the multi-regen modes that it has. It's fairly simple to operate. There's a little button here that shows you the levels that go up, and all you have to do is build speed up. It's off at the moment. The only way to really show you is, by gauging the speed of the trees passing by. And in 0, I take my foot off the throttle and the car continues to just cruise. Not really lost any speed. The speed loss is very, very gradual, so it allows you to essentially cruise on highways. Now, that's level 1, level 2, and that's level 3. That's the maximum setting for the multi-regen mode. As soon as you take it off, my foot off the brake, the car is starting to slow down. Do it again, and immediately you can see the regenerative brakes just playing their role, taking effect, and doing a phenomenal job. I mean, I was fiddling with this feature earlier in the Audi e-tron, which obviously being far more expensive and premium, it provides you a paddle shift to be able to tweak the level of regenerative braking. And that's a fairly neat feature because the way EVs operate, they're bottom heavy and they carry a lot more momentum because of the weight. And therefore it's always good to have regenerative braking not only assisting you in recuperating power, but also in bringing the car to a grinding halt. The battery size and regenerative modes aren't the only way Tata has managed to squeeze more range from the EV Max. It also gets a new vacuumless IV back system that allows for more effective cooperation between the disc brakes and the regenerative brakes, along with low resistance tires, giving you just that extra bit of range. Now you're probably wondering, what role does the EV Max fulfill in India's EV ecosystem? And the way the EV landscape is at the moment, it's pretty sparsely populated with some very expensive, very premium EVs on one end and just a handful of entry-level SUVs on the other. And that, I believe, is where the Nexon EV Max comes in. It's going to help essentially bridge the gap between the entry-level and the premium. It's not going to be able to do it entirely by itself, but it certainly has a leg up over its competition, which is a lot more expensive and not considerably more powerful. What Tata Motors has done with this car is show a vote of confidence in the EV buyer, in the internal combustion car buyer, who can now take a leap of faith and go for a car that can tackle highways, that can be taken to a road trip. And more than that, it's also a vote of confidence in the burgeoning but patchwork EV infrastructure. Now, Tata Power has set up about 1,300 fast chargers in the country, but with a car like this, Tata Motors is working with Tata Power to essentially earmark densely populated highways which could use far more DC chargers. And when that's in place, cars like these will seem like a much more sensible alternative to the army of internal combustion mid-size SUVs that are crowding the plate. Can it do that? Time will tell. But from what I can see so far, the odds are stacked in favor of the Nexon EV Max.